When a group of Wall Street types mocked an elderly woman at the local bar, they never expected a gang of Hell's Angels to be her former students. What happens when the most feared bikers in town become the guardians of a retired teacher's dignity? The worn wooden door of the Rusty Nail creaks open, letting in a slice of golden evening light that cuts through the cigarette haze. The bar smells of spilled beer and old wood, a smell both bitter and sweet. Friday nights here follow the same rhythm: loud laughter, clinking glasses, and locals letting loose after a long week. Music from an old jukebox plays in the corner, just loud enough to fill the gaps in talk, but not so loud that you can't hear the stories being told. Among the crowd sits Eleanor Winters, a 68-year-old retired English teacher, perched carefully on her usual corner stool. Her gray hair is tied back in a neat bun, and her reading glasses hang from a chain around her neck. She's nursing a single glass of white wine, taking small sips as if making it last is an art form she's mastered. Her weathered hands, stained with decades of red ink from grading papers, curl around the stem of her glass. Those hands have marked over 10,000 essays, fixed countless spelling errors, and guided young minds through the worlds of great books. Eleanor watches the room with sharp eyes that miss nothing. The same eyes that guided 3 generations of students through Shakespeare and Steinbeck. Behind those eyes are stories of 38 years in the classroom, of students who started as troublemakers and ended as scholars, of learning difficulties overcome and young minds open to new worlds. Her posture is straight, a habit from years of standing before a classroom. Even now, 5 years into retirement, she sits as if there might be a pop quiz at any moment. "Just one more, then I'm heading home," she tells Mike the bartender, who nods with the respect he's shown her since she taught him in 10th grade. "No rush, Mrs. Winters," Mike says, wiping a glass with a clean towel. "Your stool isn't going anywhere." He's 40 now, with the beginnings of gray at his temples, but to Eleanor, he's still the boy who discovered the power of words in her class. "How's the book club going?" Eleanor sighs, her shoulders dropping just a little. "Down to just 3 of us now. Mrs. Hendricks moved to Florida to live with her daughter, and Dr. Lewis doesn't get out much since his hip surgery." Mike frowns. Their loss. "Nobody talks about books like you do." Eleanor smiles, a small, private smile that lights up her blue eyes. She reaches into her worn leather purse and pulls out this month's book club selection, dog-eared and filled with sticky notes. The bar may seem an odd place for a retired teacher, but after Richard passed away 5 years ago, the empty house became too quiet. Here, at least, there's life, even if she's just watching it from the sidelines. The Rusty Nail isn't fancy. It has wooden floors worn smooth by years of boots and heels. The tables are scratched with initials and dates going back decades. Old license plates and faded photos cover the walls, each one telling a story of the small town and the people who call it home. It's not much, but it's a place where Eleanor feels less alone. The door swings open again, bringing in 3 young men in crisp button-down shirts and shiny watches. They're loud and move with the easy confidence of people who expect the world to make way for them. They head to the bar, ordering expensive whiskey and making sure everyone hears about the big deal they just closed. "Another round for us, barkeep?" one calls out, slapping a $100 bill on the counter. "And whatever the old lady is having." He nods toward Eleanor with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you, but I'm fine," Eleanor says politely, though something in her chest tightens at the way he said, "old lady." "Come on, it's Friday night. Live a little." He has perfectly white teeth and smells of expensive cologne that's too strong for the small space. Mike steps in. "Mrs. Winters is good, gentlemen. Can I get you something else?" The young men take a table near Eleanor, their voices growing louder with each round. Eleanor tries to focus on her book, but the words swim before her eyes as the noise level rises. She can feel a headache starting behind her right eye. "Look at the old lady," one snickers, not bothering to lower his voice. "Bet she's talking to her cats in her head." Eleanor's shoulders tense, but she keeps her eyes forward, a habit formed from years of handling classroom bullies. She knows better than to engage. "Probably grading papers in her mind," another adds. "-10 points for your ugly tie, Jim." They laugh, drawing stares from some of the regulars who know Eleanor, but no one steps in. It's not their fight after all, and the young men look like the type who might have lawyers on speed dial. Eleanor checks her watch. 9:30. Earlier than she usually leaves, but the headache is getting worse, and the joy of being out has faded like an old photograph left in the sun. When her wine glass empties, she stands to leave, her arthritic knee making her movements slow and careful. The book slips back into her purse, and she pulls her cardigan tighter around her thin shoulders. "Careful, Grandma. Don't break a hip," one of the young men jeers, triggering waves of laughter that ripple through nearby tables. Eleanor fumbles with the clasp of her purse, suddenly feeling every one of her 68 years. Her fingers, once nimble enough to play piano at the church every Sunday, now struggle with the simple task. She drops her copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, the same copy she read aloud to struggling students after hours for nearly 4 decades. As she bends to retrieve it, wincing at the pain in her joints, one of the men mimics her movement with exaggerated stiffness, putting a hand to his back and making a pained face that has his friends in stitches. Eleanor's cheeks burn with shame as she finally grasps the book. In her classroom, she had rules and respect. Out here, she's just an old woman, invisible except when she's the punchline of a cruel joke. She straightens up, clutching the book to her chest like a shield, and heads for the door with as much dignity as she can muster. Behind her, the mockery continues, cutting deeper than they could know. Eleanor's hand shakes slightly as she reaches for the door handle. The laughter behind her feels like stones thrown at her back. Each step toward the exit is a small battle against her stiff joints and wounded pride. The wooden floor creaks beneath her sensible shoes, marking her slow retreat. "Hey, Mrs. Winters," Mike calls from behind the bar. "You forgot your reading glasses." Eleanor turns, realizing her glasses are no longer hanging from the chain around her neck. She pats the pockets of her cardigan, feeling a moment of panic. Those glasses were a gift from Richard on their 30th wedding anniversary, one of the last presents he gave her before cancer took him. The thought of losing them makes her throat tighten. "I think they fell when you dropped your book," Mike says, coming out from behind the bar. He shoots a warning glance at the table of young men, who are now pretending to be deeply interested in their phones. Eleanor retraces her steps, eyes scanning the worn floorboards. There, partly hidden under the edge of a table, she spots the glint of metal. As she bends down again, she hears one of the young men whisper something that makes the others burst into fresh laughter. The words "fossil" and "dinosaur" reach her ears clearly. "I've got them," Mike says quickly, dropping to one knee to retrieve the glasses. He hands them to Eleanor with a gentle smile. "Don't let those guys get to you. They're just passing through town on business. Tomorrow, they'll be gone." Eleanor nods, but the damage is done. These strangers have turned her safe place into yet another spot where she feels out of place, a relic from a time no one cares about anymore. She slips the glasses into her cardigan pocket and pats Mike's arm. "Thank you, dear. I think I'll head home now." Mike frowns, concern clear in his eyes. At least let me call you a cab. It's dark out. I only live 3 blocks away, Eleanor reminds him. The walk will do me good. Before Mike can argue, the door to the Rusty Nail swings open with such force that the hinges groan in protest. A blast of cool night air sweeps in, cutting through the warm, smoky atmosphere like a knife. Everyone in the bar turns toward the entrance, conversations dropping to whispers. 4 massive figures fill the doorway, men in leather vests covered with patches, their beards streaked with gray, and expressions hard as stone. The letters H.A. are clear on their backs, and even in the dim light, Eleanor can make out the grinning skull patch that marks them as Hell's Angels. The lead writer, a mountain of a man with hands like sledgehammers and forearms covered with faded tattoos, stands at least 6'5". He scans the room slowly, his gaze moving from face to face until it lands on Eleanor. The bar goes silent. Even the jukebox seems to hold its breath between songs. The young men who were mocking Eleanor suddenly find their beer bottles fascinating, their eyes fixed firmly downward. One of them swallows so hard it's audible across the room. The massive man crosses the floor with surprising grace for his size. His boots make dull thuds against the weathered floorboards. Each step feels like a small earthquake. He stops just a few feet from Eleanor, his massive frame blocking out the overhead light like an eclipse. Mrs. Marks, Winters, his voice rumbles, surprisingly gentle, like distant thunder on a summer night. Eleanor looks up, confusion clear on her face. The man towers over her, his leather vest creaking as he shifts his weight. This close, she can see the lines around his eyes, the small scars that mark his knuckles, and something familiar in the way he holds himself. Yes, she answers, her voice steady despite her racing heart. In 38 years of teaching, she's learned never to show fear, even when faced with angry parents or school board meetings. The big man's hard face cracks into a small smile, transforming him completely. Suddenly, he looks younger, almost boyish despite the gray in his beard. Bobby Thornton? Is that you? Eleanor asks, recognition dawning in her eyes. The mountain of a man nods, suddenly looking like the shy 14-year-old who once struggled to read aloud in class. Yes, ma'am, it's been a while. 25 years at least, Eleanor says, her face lighting up with genuine joy for the first time that evening. My goodness, you've grown. Bobby laughs, a deep sound that fills the bar. Yeah, had a few growth spurts after high school. These are my brothers. He gestures to the other men, who have spread out around the bar, their presence felt in every corner. You stayed after school with me for a whole semester, Bobby says, loud enough for everyone to hear. Taught me to read when everyone else gave up on me. Eleanor remembers those afternoons clearly. The frustrated boy with dyslexia, who could barely get through a paragraph, the hours spent going over the same words until something finally clicked. She remembers the day he read a full page without stopping, the pride that straightened his back and lifted his chin. You were a hard worker, Eleanor says, reaching up to pat his massive arm. Once you set your mind to it, there was no stopping you. The other riders joined them, each nodding respectfully to Eleanor. One of them, a lean man with a scar running down his cheek, steps forward. Mrs. Winters taught me too, he says. 10th grade English, 1998. Only teacher who didn't send me to detention every other day. Because you turned in your homework, Mr. Reyes, Eleanor says, memory serving her well despite the years, even if it was sometimes creative with the facts. The man grins, showing a missing tooth. You remembered. I remember all my students, Eleanor says simply. The third rider, a stocky man with a full beard and tattoos covering his neck, joins in. You helped me get my GED after I dropped out. Came in early every morning for a month to tutor me. And you passed with flying colors, Eleanor reminds him. The young men who were mocking Eleanor earlier have gone completely silent, their faces pale as they realize the connection between this tiny woman and the imposing men surrounding her. One of them tries to signal the bartender for the check, but Mike pretends not to see. Bobby turns to Eleanor, his voice dropping so only she can hear. We saw those punks giving you trouble when we looked in the window. Not happening on our watch. There's no need, Eleanor begins. There's every need, Bobby cuts in gently. You taught us respect, Mrs. Winters. Now it's our turn to pass that lesson on. Bobby's massive hand rests lightly on Eleanor's shoulder, a gentle touch that somehow carries more weight than the heaviest blow. The bar has gone so quiet that the tick of the old clock behind the counter sounds like a hammer on anvil. Even the jukebox seems to hold its breath, the last song fading out without another starting up. Maybe you should introduce us to your new friends, Bobby suggests, turning his gaze toward the table of young men. His voice is calm, almost friendly, but there's steel beneath the softness. The leather of his vest creaks as he shifts his weight, the sound sharp in the silent room. Eleanor hesitates. Despite the hurt they caused, she spent a lifetime teaching young people to solve problems with words, not threats. Bobby, I don't think... Just a friendly chat, Bobby assures her, but his eyes never leave the three men, who are now sitting frozen like rabbits who've spotted a hawk's shadow. The other riders have moved to form a loose circle around the table, not crowding, but definitely blocking any easy exit. Gentlemen, Bobby addresses them, stepping forward. The floorboards groan under his weight. I couldn't help but notice how interested you are in my former English teacher. The young men exchange nervous glances. The one who seems to be their leader, a sandy-haired man in an expensive blue shirt, clears his throat. Look, we were just having some fun. Fun, Bobby repeats, as if testing the word. See, that's interesting, because from where I was standing, it looked like three grown men picking on someone who taught half this town to read. The sandy-haired man's face flushes red. We didn't mean anything by it. Didn't you? Asks the rider with the scar, leaning in slightly. Because I clearly heard you telling her to be careful not to break a hip. The third rider, the stocky one with the neck tattoos, crosses his arms over his chest. The movement pulls his vest tight, revealing a glimpse of something tucked into his waistband. In my experience, he says quietly, people usually mean exactly what they say. The youngest of the three businessmen, barely more than a boy himself with his fresh face and nervous eyes, looks close to tears. We're sorry, he blurts out. We just had a few drinks and you thought it would be fun to mock someone who's given her life to teaching kids like you used to be. Bobby finishes for him. Someone who stayed late and came in early. Someone who remembered your name even when the principal didn't. Eleanor steps forward, her teacher's instinct to diffuse conflict kicking in despite her earlier hurt. Bobby, I think they understand now. Bobby holds her gaze for a long moment, then nods slightly. I hope so, Mrs. Winters, but just to be sure, I think these gentlemen might want to show how sorry they are. The leader of the young men nods quickly. Absolutely. Next round is on us, for everyone in the bar. His hand shakes slightly as he pulls out his wallet. That's generous, Bobby says, his voice still deadly calm. But I was thinking of something more. Educational. A few of the regular customers shift in their seats, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of concern and fascination. Old Tom by the window has his cell phone out, ready to call for help if things take a bad turn. Mike stands behind the bar, a baseball bat within easy reach, but he makes no move to intervene. He remembers too clearly how Eleanor stayed after hours to help him understand Romeo and Juliet when he was failing English. "What did you have in mind?" the sandy-haired leader asks, trying to keep his voice steady. Bobby smiles, and somehow that's more frightening than if he'd scowled. Mrs. Winters runs a book club, Saturday mornings, right here at the Rusty Nail, 8 a.m. sharp. Eleanor looks up at Bobby in surprise. "How did you know about the book club?" "Mike mentioned it when we stopped by last month," Bobby explains, nodding toward the bartender. "Said it's down to just a few people now." The young men look confused, glancing between Bobby and Eleanor. "I think these gentlemen might benefit from some literary discussion," Bobby continues. "This month's book is, what was it again, Mrs. Winters?" "To Kill a Mockingbird," Eleanor replies, patting her purse where the book rests. "Perfect," Bobby says. "A book about justice and treating people with dignity. I expect to see all three of you here tomorrow morning, books in hand, ready to discuss chapters 1 through 10. The sandy-haired man's mouth falls open. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Bobby replies, and the temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. "We'll all be here. Me and my brothers make a point of supporting Mrs. Winters' educational efforts." The stocky rider with the neck tattoos leans in. "And if you don't show, well, we ride through this town every few weeks. We'll find you." "This is ridiculous," the sandy-haired man protests, but his voice lacks conviction. "We're leaving town tomorrow." "Then I guess you'll be reading all night," Bobby says with a shrug. "Wouldn't be the first time Mrs. Winters inspired an all-nighter, right, boys?" He glances at his fellow riders, who nod, some of them chuckling at memories of last-minute cramming for tests. Eleanor watches this unfold with mixed feelings. On one hand, she's touched by her former students' defense of her. On the other, she's never believed in forced learning. "Bobby, if they don't want to come—" "They want to," Bobby interrupts gently. "Don't they?" His gaze locks onto each young man in turn until all three nod reluctantly. "Excellent," Bobby says, clapping his hands together once, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet bar. 8 a.m. Don't be late, and I expect thoughtful contributions to the discussion. The tension in the room shifts, not disappearing entirely, but changing form. What had been the threat of physical conflict has transformed into something else. The threat of intellectual engagement, of being held accountable not with fists, but with questions about theme and character development. Several of the regulars are hiding smiles now, and Mike has moved away from the baseball bat, returning to wiping glasses with a barely concealed grin. Bobby turns back to Eleanor, his fierce expression softening. "Now, Mrs. Winters, how about we escort you home? It's getting late, and these streets can be rough after dark." Before Eleanor can answer, the door to the Rusty Nail opens again. A blast of cold air sweeps in, carrying with it the rumble of more motorcycles pulling up outside. 6 more riders enter, their patches matching those of Bobby and his friends. They nod to their brothers, and then, seeing Eleanor, break into wide smiles. "Mrs. Winters," calls one, a woman with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight braid. "Susie Blackwood, class of '92. You probably don't remember me, but—" "Back row, left side," Eleanor says immediately, her eyes lighting up. "You wrote that wonderful essay about your grandfather's farm." Susie's weathered face splits into a grin. "You remembered?" "Of course I did. It won the state prize that year." The bar has transformed now. the earlier mockery forgotten as more former students greet their teacher. The young businessmen sit forgotten at their table, watching in amazement as rough-looking bikers swap stories about essay assignments and Shakespeare quotes with a tiny woman in a cardigan. Eleanor stands straighter, her earlier shame replaced by a quiet pride. These are her legacy, not just the doctors and lawyers who send Christmas cards, but these writers too, who found something in her classroom worth remembering all these years later. The next morning dawns clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of the Rusty Nail in a way that transforms the bar completely. Dust motes dance in the golden beams, and the wooden floors, scrubbed clean overnight, gleam with a warm honey glow. Gone are the clouds of smoke and the sharp smell of spilled beer. Instead, the air carries the rich scent of fresh coffee and warm muffins, courtesy of Mike, who arrived at 6 to prepare for the unexpected influx of book club attendees. Eleanor approaches the bar at 7:45, her worn leather satchel heavy with books and notes. She wears a simple blue dress today instead of her usual cardigan, and a pearl necklace that catches the light when she moves. She's put extra effort into her appearance this morning, a habit from decades of standing before classrooms. Her steps are hesitant at first, unsure what to expect. Last night seems almost like a dream now, too strange to have actually happened. "Morning, Mrs. Winters," Mike calls, setting a steaming mug of tea on the counter. "Just how you like it. Touch of honey. No milk." "Thank you, dear," Eleanor says, taking the mug gratefully. "I don't suppose anyone else is coming today." She tries to keep disappointment from her voice. After all, what are the chances that a group of Hell's Angels and 3 mocking businessmen would actually show up for a Saturday morning book club? Mike just smiles and gestures toward the door. "Why don't you set up at the big table? I think you'll need the space today." Eleanor turns, confusion creasing her brow, but does as he suggests. She arranges her books and notes on the large round table that usually hosts poker games, smoothing the pages of her teaching notes with hands that shake slightly from age but still move with purpose. The familiar routine calms her, takes her back to mornings in her classroom preparing for the day's lessons. At 7:02, the door swings open. Eleanor looks up, expecting perhaps Mrs. Jenkins or Dr. Lewis, the last faithful members of her dwindling book club. Instead, Bobby Thornton ducks his massive frame through the entrance, followed by his brothers in leather. They carry paperback copies of To Kill a Mockingbird, some new and crisp, others clearly well-loved and dog-eared. Susie is among them, her gray-streaked braid now adorned with a small silver clip shaped like an open book. "Morning, Mrs. Winters," Bobby says, his gruff voice oddly formal. "Hope we're not late." "Not at all," Eleanor replies, her face lighting up. "Right on time, in fact." More riders file in behind Bobby, filling the bar with the creak of leather and the soft thud of heavy boots. There must be at least 15 of them, far more than were present last night. Some nod to Eleanor with shy smiles, others look nervous, as if they're back in school and worried about pop quizzes. "Word spread through the chapter," Bobby explains, seeing Eleanor's surprised expression. "Turns out a lot of us had you as a teacher over the years." Eleanor's eyes grow misty as she recognizes more faces. Students she taught 20, even 30 years ago, now grown with lines on their faces and gray in their hair. Some she would have passed on the street without recognizing. But here, in this context, with books in their hands, she can see the children they once were. The door opens again, and Eleanor's breath catches. The three young businessmen from last night stand hesitantly in the doorway, looking like they've had very little sleep. Their fancy clothes are rumpled now, their earlier arrogance replaced by uncertainty. Each holds a new copy of the book. Price tags still visible on the backs. A hush falls over the room as the bikers turn to stare at them. The sandy-haired leader swallows hard but steps forward. "Mrs. Winters," he says, his voice rough from lack of sleep. We're here for the book club." "I can see that," Eleanor says, gesturing to the chairs still empty around the big table. "Please, join us. We were just about to begin." The young men take their seats, sandwiched between hulking riders who watch them with expressions that range from amusement to lingering hostility. Mike brings over a tray of coffee mugs and a plate of muffins, setting them in the middle of the table with a wink to Eleanor. "Before we start discussing the book," Eleanor says, looking around at the unlikely gathering, "I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's been a long time since we had a full house." Her voice wavers slightly, but she straightens her shoulders and continues. "Now, who would like to share their thoughts on the character of Atticus Finch and what he stands for in the novel?" To everyone's surprise, it's the youngest of the three businessmen who raises his hand first. He stands up for what's right, even when it's not popular, he says quietly. Even when everyone else thinks he's wrong. Bobby nods approvingly, and he teaches his kids to see people for who they really are, not just what others say about them. The discussion flows from there, gathering momentum like a river after rain. Eleanor guides it with the skill of a veteran teacher, drawing out quieter voices, gently redirecting when needed, pointing out connections between the text and life that make the book breathe with relevance even decades after it was written. The sandy-haired businessman speaks up hesitantly after listening for a while. "I never actually read this in school," he admits. "I always used the study guides." "Many students do," Eleanor says without judgment, "but it's never too late to start reading for real understanding." By 10 o'clock, the group is deep in discussion about justice and prejudice, about standing up for others, about seeing the world through different eyes. The barriers between the businessmen and the bikers have begun to dissolve, replaced by a shared engagement with ideas bigger than their differences. Eleanor watches it all with a quiet joy, seeing what she's always known, that books can build bridges between the most unlikely people, that stories can reveal our shared humanity in ways nothing else can. When the session ends at 11, no one seems in a hurry to leave. The sandy-haired businessman approaches Eleanor, hand extended. "Mrs. Winters, I owe you an apology for last night," he says, meeting her eyes directly. "I was cruel and thoughtless. There's no excuse for that." Eleanor takes his hand, her grip firmer than he expected. "Apology accepted, young man. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them. I'd like to make a donation to your book club," he offers, "for supplies, refreshments, whatever you need." "That's very kind," Eleanor says, "but what we need most is participants, regular readers who come because they want to, not because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't." She glances meaningfully at Bobby, who has the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Outside, the row of motorcycles gleams in the morning sun, chrome catching the light like mirrors. Next to them now are three expensive cars, looking oddly out of place, yet somehow fitting in this new context. The businessmen leave with promises to send books for the club, while the riders linger, helping Eleanor pack up her notes and talking among themselves about starting a reading group in their clubhouse. Mike watches from behind the bar, shaking his head in wonder. "You know," he says to Eleanor as she prepares to leave. "I think Saturday mornings just became my favorite shift." Eleanor smiles, feeling lighter than she has in years. As she steps outside, she finds Bobby waiting by the door, ready to walk her home as he promised. "Thank you," she says simply, not just for last night, but for today, for remembering. Bobby ducks his head, suddenly looking like that 14-year-old boy again. "You made us feel like we mattered, Mrs. Winters, like what we thought was important. Not many people did that for kids like us." Eleanor reaches up to pat his cheek, the way she did when he finally managed to read a full page without stopping. "That's because it was true, Bobby. It still is." They walk together down the sunny street, the tiny white-haired teacher and the massive biker, while behind them the rusty nail buzzes with new energy, a place transformed not by force, but by respect, by stories shared, by bridges built between worlds that seemed too far apart to connect. In her classroom, Eleanor had always taught that words have power, power to hurt, yes, but also power to heal, to bring together, to change hearts. Today, in the golden light of a Saturday morning, surrounded by students spanning 30 years of teaching, she sees that lesson come to life in a way she never could have imagined when she first took that corner stool at the Rusty Nail 5 lonely years ago.